"Oh Lord, sir, are you okay?" Maya shouted as the door of Rose Hill Diner swung wide and the freezing morning air punched her cheeks. The tray in her hands jolted, and in one horrifying second, the paper cup of steaming coffee tipped splashing across the chest of the tall man rushing in. It happened in a blink. He collided with her shoulder. Maya reacted before thought existed. Her tray clattered to the ground, and both hands shot forward, fingers gripping his coat sleeve and forearm. The momentum still took him down, but instead of smashing flat onto the frozen concrete, he landed with her cushioning his fall just enough to spare his head from cracking against the step. "Oh God, sir, I am so sorry," she panicked, voice trembling as she dropped to her knees beside him. "Are you burned? Did that hit your skin? I didn't mean Lord. Please tell me you're okay." Steam rose from his coat where the coffee soaked in. The cold air turned visible with each of Maya's frantic breaths. His face tightened in shock and embarrassment, but her hands were already hovering anxiously, checking his coat, his collar, near his jaw, terrified she'd scalded him. "You hit the ice, I'm so sorry. Are you hurt? Sir, can you hear me?" He looked at her, really looked, dark curls escaping her bandana, breath trembling with genuine fear, not of him, but for him. In his world, mistakes cost money. In hers, they cost survival. I think I'm all right," he murmured, stunned not by the pain, but by the fierce sincerity in her eyes. No expectation, no calculation, only human worry. But the moment shattered like glass. "Maya," Mr. Carter burst out from inside, voice sharp and ugly. "What did you do?" Maya flinched. "He slipped, and the drink he hit me and it spilled, but it—" "You threw hot coffee on a customer?" Carter barked, storming toward them. "And tripped him? Have you lost your mind?" "Nah, I didn't. He bumped into me, and he fell. He's hurt. Mr. Carter, please. Don't talk back." He grabbed her arm harshly to yank her upright. The motion made her elbow slam against the metal doorframe. Pain shot up to her shoulder. She gasped. The man on the ground, Richard Sterling, started to speak. "It was my fault. Carter cut him off, pointing at Maya like she was filth. "I knew you'd cause trouble someday. You people think rules don't apply to you." Maya's lips parted in disbelief. Heat and shame crawled up her throat. "Mr. Carter, please," he slipped. "I swear, I didn't mean—" "That's enough," he snapped. "You're done here. Fired." Maya froze. No, please," she whispered. "I need this job. My rent, my brother's textbooks I can't lose, please." She dropped to her knees on the icy concrete, coffee-stained apron pressed to the cold ground. Pride wasn't an option when life was survival. "Mr. Carter, please don't do this. I swear it wasn't my fault." Her voice cracked. "I beg you." Richard pushed himself up, stunned by the sight of her kneeling. Pain etched across her face more deeply than any burn he felt. "Sir," she whispered to him, desperate. "Please tell him." Richard opened his mouth, hesitated. Habit, power, silence. It clamped down around him, and in that hesitation, Maya's fate sealed. "You're fired," Carter barked again, "and get out before I call the police for assault." The word assault struck her harder than any shove. Tears rimmed her eyes, but she swallowed them down. Tears in public were weakness. Weakness was danger. She stood, trembling, brushing ice from her palms. "I didn't hurt him. I was trying to help." From behind the diner glass, patrons stared. Some pitied. None spoke. Maya walked inside, shoulders square despite the sting in her elbow. She moved with quiet dignity, even as humiliation pulsed through her veins. In the break room, she pulled her tote from her locker, her thermos, a crumpled bus pass, and the fading photo of her mother smiling in a church kitchen. She paused, touching the picture. "Mama, I'm trying. God knows I'm trying." When she stepped back outside, the cold bit even deeper. Her breath shook, not from chill but grief. Richard stood there, coat still steaming, guilt burning hotter beneath the wool. Maya met his eyes, not angry, not pleading anymore, just exhausted. "Take care, sir," she whispered, "and watch your step next time." Her voice cracked only once. She turned and walked down the street, boots crunching snow, vanishing into the morning white like someone the world chose not to see. Richard stood, frozen heart pounding in a way hostile boardrooms never provoked. He had built empires on decisions. Calculated, Ruthless, clean. Yet he did nothing when one human word could have changed everything. He watched the corner where she disappeared. He heard her voice echo, saw her kneel, felt that silence like a stain. In his chest, something unfamiliar stirred. Not guilt. Shame had sharper teeth. The snowfall thickened, softening the street, blurring the edges, turning the world quiet enough to hear regret breathing. He whispered to no one. I should have said something, but he didn't, and the cold around him suddenly felt earned. He didn't know her story, but he felt, with a weight he couldn't name, that this moment was not done with him. Not yet. If this moment touched you too, give this video a like and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. You never know, someone nearby might be watching with you. Inside, Carter wiped the counter with the energy of someone reclaiming his domain. He kept glancing toward the door, toward Richard. You all right, sir? You sure you don't want me to call someone? Richard stepped inside finally, the bell above the door jingling weakly. I'm fine, he said curtly. Let me get you a fresh coat of coffee. On the house. Carter flashed the kind of greasy smile that came not from kindness, but from survival instinct. Again, sorry you had to deal with all that. Richard nodded slowly, eyes scanning the diner as if looking for the missing heartbeat. There was a seat at the window where Maya had often stood to greet customers. Empty now, a half-wiped menu left behind on the counter. A red lipstick stain on a napkin holder that somehow felt more personal than it should. He sat at a corner booth, his back to the window, hands folded. Carter brought a mug and poured without asking. Cream? Sugar? No, Richard replied. A silence settled between them before Carter cleared his throat. We don't usually have incidents like that here. Maya's, well, she's got her own way about her. Good worker most days, just, you know how it is. Richard looked up, his tone flat. No, I don't. Carter blinked. Right, of course. Anyway, hope your day gets better. He returned to the counter. Richard didn't sip the coffee. He didn't even look at his phone. Instead, he stared out the window where snow still fell in lazy spirals. Something about that street corner felt different now. He could almost see the imprint of her kneeling figure in the snow, like it had burned a mark even nature wouldn't cover. He'd built his career on making the right move before anyone else knew a move was needed. Buy low. Sell high. Read the market. Read people. But this morning, he hadn't read the room. He hadn't even opened the book. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded itinerary. The name Henderson & Co. development plan stared back at him. Today's visit was meant to be brief, a simple site check before finalizing the land buyout contracts. In his head, it had always been numbers, parcels, ROI. He hadn't thought of people. Not until now. He rose, leaving the full mug untouched, and walked out. On the sidewalk, the snow had begun to settle into slush. He turned in the direction Maya had gone, unsure where his feet were taking him but needing to move. A block down, he spotted a yellow city bus turning a corner. He saw her through the window, sitting near the back, clutching her tote bag to her chest, her eyes fixed out the opposite window, face unreadable. Too late. He shoved his hands deep in his pockets and kept walking. That evening, Maya sat at the kitchen table of her small apartment 2 stories above a pawn shop. A single bulb swung slightly above her head. The apartment smelled faintly of rice and old oil from the shop below. Her elbow throbbed. She didn't take off her coat. Something about removing it felt too final, like accepting what had happened. Her phone buzzed. A message from her younger brother. Did you get off early today? I can swing by with dinner. She stared at the screen. Her thumbs hovered. No, I got fired. But she didn't send it. Instead, she typed, Nah, I'm okay. Just tired. Love you. She stood and opened a cupboard. There was some dry pasta, a can of tomato soup. She turned on the burner, but even the flame sounded hollow tonight. In the living room, the photo of her mother still sat by the record player. That same apron, that same smile, that same worn dignity. I tried, Mama, Maya whispered. Lord knows I tried. She ate standing by the window, watching snow fall over the alley, coating trash bins in a strange beauty. Somewhere below, the sound of a trumpet drifted up, someone playing blues 2 blocks over. The notes bent and broke like memories. Across town, Richard sat in his hotel suite, a glass of bourbon in his hand, the city skyline blinking indifferently in the distance. He turned the volume down on the news report playing on mute. Another debate on redevelopment. Talking heads arguing over revitalization and gentrification. None of them had knelt in snow that morning. None of them had met Maya William. He looked down at the scald mark on his coat. The dry cleaner could probably get it out, but some things shouldn't be removed. He set the glass down and walked to the window, staring into the dark. He didn't know her story, but he had a feeling she deserved to finish it her way. By morning, the snow had hardened into crusty banks along the sidewalk, grayed by tire slush and boot prints. Richmond had a way of making even fresh snow look tired after one night. Maya stood by the stove in her apartment, stirring instant grits with one hand while her other cradled her elbow, still sore from yesterday's shove. She hadn't told her brother the truth. Not yet. He was too close to his own edge trying to finish school, working nights at the grocery store, already stretched thin. He didn't need to carry her burden too. The radio hummed softly in the corner. A local talk show played. Something about city funding. New development projects. A big buyout in the works. Maya turned it off. She'd been up most of the night, not crying. She didn't allow herself that, but replaying everything in her mind the moment the coffee spilled, his silence, Carter's hands, the scrape of her knees on ice. Shame curled hot in her stomach like spoiled milk. Still, she got dressed. Still, she tied her hair up in the red bandana Mama once wore. Still, she pulled on the only clean coat left that didn't smell like bacon grease. She had to find work. 2 buses and a 3-block walk later, she arrived at a small church off Brook Road. The basement kitchen was warm, full of clatter and low gospel music, and the old ladies running it knew her well. "Maya, baby," Miss Earline called, drying her hands. "We weren't expecting you till Sunday." "I'm not here to serve," Maya replied with a smile she didn't feel. "I'm here to ask if y'all got space for a pair of working hands." They didn't ask why. They knew. Word moved fast through their part of the city, faster than snowmelt and twice as unforgiving. Miss Earline handed her an apron. "One of our volunteers didn't show. Grab a knife." And just like that, Maya was chopping onions and stirring pots of lentils, feeding folks who had even less than she did. Her elbow ached, but her soul eased. Here, there was no Carter, no pity, no shame, just work, just food, just dignity. Across town, Richard sat in the back of a black SUV, his driver easing through narrow residential streets lined with tired porches and faded flags. The manila folder in his lap held a map of Parcel Rue 2 Amperes, better known in city records as the Rose Hill Redevelopment Zone. To him, it was supposed to be a line item, just another cluster of buildings with rising land value and decaying tenants. Easy to flip, easy to justify. Now it looked like an accusation. He opened his briefcase slowly. Inside, stacked neatly beside his laptop and contracts, was a crumpled napkin. He didn't remember keeping it, but there it was stained with lipstick, the same one Maya had left behind on the diner counter. He stared at it a long time before setting it aside and pulling out the site visit report. Henderson was waiting for him in a converted office near the old textile mill. A white guy with a politician's smile and a developer's eyes, polished, but sharp. Too sharp. "There he is," Henderson greeted him, clapping him on the back. "Ready to seal the deal?" "Let's walk the site," Richard replied. They moved through cracked sidewalks and graffiti-tagged alleys, past churches with peeling paint and houses with plastic tarps for windows. Henderson talked numbers, foot traffic projections, mixed-use zoning potential, retail interests. But Richard was distracted. He saw kids with backpacks 2 sizes too big. He saw old men smoking on their porches, watching the world move on without them. He saw a mural half-painted of Harriet Tubman, tagged over by some teenager too young to know better. And he saw Maya, not physically but everywhere. In the cracked tile outside the diner, in the warmth coming from the community church, in the resilience that hung in the air like cinnamon and oil. Back in the office, Henderson poured 2 glasses of bourbon. "Here's to progress." Richard didn't lift his glass. "How many families live in this zone?" Henderson raised a brow. "Less than 100. Most are month-to-month renters. A few holdouts with deeds, nothing we can't handle." Handley? Buy him out or let the city assess him into compliance. Pressure works. Trust me. Richard leaned back, glass untouched. Do you know the name Maya William? Henderson blinked. Should I? She worked at Rose Hill Diner. Carter fired her yesterday. Ah, Carter. Good man. Knows how to keep staff in line. Richard's jaw tensed. She got in a man's face, threw hot coffee, tried to claim innocence. Typical mess. Carter handled it. She didn't throw it, Richard said quietly. What? She didn't throw anything. I bumped into her. I slipped. Henderson waved a dismissive hand. Doesn't matter. She's gone now. The diner's next. Assuming you're ready to move. Richard stared at the contracts in front of him. All neat, all legal, and all wrong. He stood. We're not signing today. Henderson frowned. Excuse me? Something doesn't feel right. I need time. You're kidding. I never kid about money. Henderson's tone turned sharp. We've been working this project for 6 months, Sterling. The city's in. Zoning's done. What's this really about? Richard gathered his things. Maybe I want to see who lives in the buildings I'm tearing down before I do it. Since when do you care? Richard looked him in the eye. Since yesterday. No. Later that night, Maya left the church kitchen long after dark. Her hands smelled like garlic and thyme, and her coat reeked of fry oil, but her heart was steady. She stepped out into the cold, alone, her footsteps crunching over salted sidewalks. At the corner, she paused. A black SUV idled by the curb. The window rolled down just enough for her to see him. Him. He didn't get out. Didn't wave. Just looked. She looked back, stone still. Her eyes not soft this time, but steady. Then she turned and kept walking. Inside the SUV, Richard watched her silhouette disappear into the city lights. And for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel like the one in control. The next morning, sunlight crawled through the blinds of Maya's small apartment, diffused and weak, as if unsure it had the right to enter. She lay awake long before dawn, staring at the cracked plaster ceiling. Thoughts swirled like winter, wind sharp, relentless, impossible to silence. Yesterday's humiliation still burned. The sting in her elbow lingered, but the deeper ache lived somewhere behind her ribs. Mama used to say dignity was like a houseplant. If you didn't water it every day, the world would pluck it from your window and claim you never owned it. Maya sat up, breath steadying. She grabbed the small ceramic pot on the windowsill, a struggling African violet, and misted its wilting leaves. We're both still here, she whispered. So we keep going. My. She dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, pulled on an old denim jacket, and tied her bandana. The mirror reflected tired eyes but unbroken ones. She had no job, barely any savings left, and no guarantees. But she still had 2 working hands and a heart that refused to rot in bitterness. Outside, frost painted the fire escape. Richmond's winter bit sharp, but Maya moved fast 2 buses and a short walk to the church kitchen again. As she opened the basement door, warmth and the familiar smell of simmering onions washed over her. Volunteers bustled like bees around metal counters. Miss Earline waved a ladle in greeting. Back so soon? We thought you might sleep in after yesterday. Couldn't, Maya answered simply, tying on her apron. Lord, this girl is made of steel, Miss Earline muttered fondly. It's either steel or stubborn, Maya said, forcing a smile. And stubborn feeds more mouths. No. That earned a laugh and a few approving nods. Here, no one asked what she lost. They only saw what she could give. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work chopping celery, rinsing collards, mixing cornbread batter in a giant stainless bowl. Every motion soothed, grounding her back into purpose. But today felt different. Today, more people came through the door than usual. The line for meals stretched down the hallway. Cold drove them in. Hunger kept them waiting. Maya greeted each person with warmth, handing out bowls like blessings. A little boy in a puffy jacket stared at her bandana. My mama got one like that, he said proudly. Red. It means she got style, Maya replied. Like you do. He grinned, ran to his mother. Small joys, small victories. Mid-morning, Pastor Lewis entered the kitchen, coat dusted with snow. He was tall, with a voice that carried like a good hymn. Maya, he called softly. Got a minute? She wiped her hands and followed him to his small office. He closed the door gently behind them, papers and Bibles piled high on his desk, but his smile was clean and uncluttered. Sit, he offered, but she remained standing. Pastor Lewis folded his hands. I heard what happened yesterday. Her stomach tightened. Is the whole city talking? No, he said kindly. But our people talk when one of ours is hurt. Maya looked at the floor. They fired me. I begged. It didn't matter. His voice turned grave. Begging rarely moves a stone heart, but standing up will carve one. She tried to smile. I just need work. That's all. And you'll get it, he assured. You're skilled. We can find you a program, even scholarship applications if you want culinary training. You're too gifted to stay in the shadows. Maya swallowed. Thank you, Pastor. But today I just gotta keep my hands busy. Tomorrow ain't promised. Pastor Lewis nodded, respect shining. That humility's your strength, child. And it'll carry you farther than pride ever will. Before she returned to the kitchen, he added softly, By the way, someone asked about you this morning. Her pulse skipped. She didn't need a name to know who. Maya's voice hardened low. I don't want anything from him. I know, the pastor replied, but sometimes God sends us lessons through the ones who break us. She left without answering. Back in the kitchen, she worked faster, heat rising in her chest, not from the ovens, but from the memory of a man standing silent while her dignity cracked like ice. Miles away, in a glass-walled conference room high above downtown, Richard couldn't focus. 2 screens glowed in front of him, one spreadsheet, one news briefing. He saw numbers, saw percentages, but his mind replayed a very different scene. Maya kneeling on ice, her voice breaking as she begged. He had waited years for a deal like Rose Hill. Demographics perfect, city support locked, profit all but guaranteed. And yet he couldn't shake the feeling that signing those papers would stain him more permanently than any spilled coffee ever could. Sterling? He looked up. His assistant stood at the doorway. Henderson called twice. He says the city wants confirmation. Richard nodded absently. Tell him I'll call later. His assistant hesitated. Sir, you look troubled. What? Richard gave a humorless huff. That's a polite word for it. You always made decisions quick, she ventured. What's different this time? He paused. Yesterday, he would have said nothing. Today, truth crept in. Someone reminded me people live in the numbers I move. His assistant blinked. That someone must matter. He didn't answer. He stared at his leather briefcase instead. The napkin was still inside. He wasn't sure why he kept it, maybe as proof he wasn't imagining her impact. Late afternoon, he found himself driving, not knowing where. The city blurred into brick homes, barber shops, murals, corner stores. Somehow, he ended up back near the church. He parked but didn't get out. Through the half-frosted basement windows, he saw her moving with purpose, wiping sweat from her brow, feeding people with a tenderness that could rebuild nations if someone just gave it power. And he sat there, feeling like a stranger in his own life. Inside, Maya felt a strange heaviness, like someone watching. She turned to the tiny window and caught a flash of black paint and chrome. The same SUV. Her chest tightened. She looked away. She didn't hate him. She hated what he represented. What silence like his had done to her mother's generation. To neighborhoods like this. To people who worked twice as hard just to earn half as much respect. But she could not break every man who reminded her of injustice. She could only choose not to kneel again. Evening fell. She walked out with the volunteers. Snow crunched underfoot. The cold bit sharper. The SUV engine hummed. She didn't stop walking. Didn't look his way. But she didn't hurry either. Strength moves at its own pace. Her phone buzzed, her brother texting. Just checking on you. Proud of you always. Her steps steadied. A block behind her, Richard finally exhaled. He wasn't sure what he was searching for, but watching her walk away felt like watching the truth leave a room he didn't know how to enter. He whispered to no one, I don't know how to fix this. But he also knew something else: he wasn't done. Redemption wasn't a business move. It was earned. And for the first time in his life, he was terrified he might not be worthy of earning it. Richard Sterling stared at the blank document on his laptop screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, unmoving. The cursor blinked at him like a question mark. Outside his hotel room window, Richmond moved slowly beneath a gray sky, the buildings heavy with winter and weariness. He had meetings to attend, calls to make, a deal to close, but none of it felt grounded anymore. He leaned back, jaw tense, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. 2 nights now he'd driven past that church, watched Maya work, watched her ignore him, and somehow, it was her silence that spoke loudest. He had always prided himself on reading people, predicting reactions, leveraging behavior like assets. But Maya? She didn't react the way people in his world did. She didn't flinch. She didn't beg anymore, and she certainly didn't play the game. He shut the laptop and stood. He needed clarity, and strangely, he knew where he might find it. By mid-morning, he returned to the place he hadn't planned to step foot in again, Rose Hill Diner. The bell above the door rang as he entered, but the room felt colder now, not from the weather, but from the absence. The chatter was duller. The counters lacked their shine. The woman behind the register was new, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Carter wasn't at the front, but Richard spotted him in the back booth, hunched over invoices and chewing a pen like it owed him money. He approached without a word and sat across from him. Carter looked up, startled. "Well, Mr. Sterling? Back again?" Richard nodded slowly. "This place feels different." Carter gave a dry laugh. "Well, you know. Staff turns over. Business stays steady." "Does it?" Richard glanced around. 2 booths empty. No music playing. A regular in the corner, Mr. Jennings, sat sipping coffee silently, casting cautious glances their way. Carter shrugged. "Folks come and go. No one's irreplaceable." "Dud." Richard leaned in. "You lost more than an employee that day." Carter scoffed. "You mean Maya? Look, she was trouble. Always with a side comment. Always thinking she knew better. I don't need that kind of energy. Besides, it was her fault." "No," Richard said flatly. "It was mine." That made Carter pause. "I bumped into her. Slipped. She tried to help. You fired her anyway." "You said nothing," Carter challenged. "If it was your fault, you sure stayed quiet about it." "The one." Richard's jaw clenched. "I was wrong." "Well," Carter replied, folding his arms. "It's done now." Richard stared at him. "People remember how you treat others, especially when no one's watching." Carter waved him off. "You think this place survives on good feelings? It survives on timing, tips, and not ticking off customers. That girl forgot that. Now, unless you came here to buy this diner, I've got real work to do." Richard stood, resisting the urge to say more. There was no winning in that booth. No logic to offer that would undo pride wrapped in bitterness. He stepped out into the street again, breath visible in the cold. Across the block, an elderly woman swept her steps with slow, deliberate motions. A church bell chimed noon. A little girl held her father's hand as they crossed the street, her gloves mismatched. The world went on, quiet, resilient, and Maya was somewhere in it. At that same hour, Maya stood at a grocery store freezer, staring at a row of frozen vegetables and doing math in her head. Lentils at home. Maybe stretch it with some mixed peas. She heard a voice behind her, gentle, familiar. "Miss William?" She turned. A tall woman with silver curls and soft eyes smiled at her. "You don't know me," the woman continued, "but I saw what happened at Rose Hill. You held your head high, baby. I just wanted to say that." Maya blinked, surprised. "Thank you, ma'am." The woman reached into her purse and pressed something into Maya's hand. A crumpled $10 bill. "Buy yourself something that doesn't come with sacrifice." "I can't." "You can," the woman said firmly, with that elder grace Maya had learned never to argue with. "It's not charity. It's what we do for our own." Maya stood still as the woman walked away. The bill crinkled in her fingers, soft as memory. That evening, she took a longer walk home, needing air. She passed by Harriet's Hands Thrift, waved to the shop owner, stopped to tie a child's loose shoelace without a second thought. And as she reached the corner near her apartment, a figure stepped out of the shadows. "Richard." Maya froze. He didn't move closer, didn't offer charm or excuse, just took off his gloves slowly, like he wanted to be bare before her. "I didn't come to apologize," he said. "Not because I'm not sorry, but because words feel empty if they don't come with change. No, she crossed her arms. So, what are you here for? I went back to the diner. It's not the same without you. That place was never mine, she said. I just rented dignity there until they changed the locks. Richard winced. You deserved better. She studied him. Why do you care now? Because someone asked me yesterday why this deal felt different, he said. And I didn't have an answer. But I do now. You're the reason. Maya narrowed her eyes. The deal? I'm the one behind the Rose Hill project, he said. Or, I was. Her face changed, not shock, but recognition, like puzzle pieces snapping together. And now? He hesitated. Now I'm trying to figure out how to build something without erasing everything good that came before it. She stepped forward just slightly. You think buying redemption is as easy as flipping contracts? No, he admitted, but I think listening is a start. Maya searched his face, for lies, for arrogance, for anything familiar from that morning on the ice. But what she saw was something raw, not yet trustworthy. But human. She turned away. You want to learn, Mr. Sterling? I do. Then stop watching from behind glass. Come wash dishes at the church tomorrow. Maybe then you'll learn how community really survives. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, What time? She didn't smile. 6, Monsieur Sharp. And she walked away. But this time, she didn't walk fast. Behind her, Richard exhaled something between relief and fear. He'd been given a second chance. He just wasn't sure yet what it would cost. Richard's alarm buzzed at 5:15 a.m., sharp. For a man used to early calls with investors in Hong Kong and Zurich, this shouldn't have felt foreign. But it did. Not because of the hour, because of the purpose. He'd traded a tailored wool suit for jeans and a flannel shirt, both recently purchased to blend in better. He shaved, splashed cold water on his face, and skipped the hotel's espresso machine. Today wouldn't begin with luxury. As he stepped out into the early morning dark, Richmond still slept. Streetlights flickered. Ice crusted over the sidewalk like thin glass. The same sidewalk where he'd fallen just days ago. Clumsy and disconnected. Now he was walking into unfamiliar ground, voluntarily. The church kitchen buzzed with activity by the time he arrived. From the alley entrance, he saw Maya through the window, her back to him as she stirred a massive pot of grits. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair tied in that same red bandana. She looked comfortable in her element, confident in a way he hadn't seen in conference rooms or catered galas. He hesitated at the door. Before he could knock, it opened. Miss Earline stood there, holding a tray of eggs. Well, the Wall Street man decided to come hungry? Her voice wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't warm either. I came to help, Richard said. You know how to wash dishes without breaking china? I'm a quick learner. She raised a skeptical brow. We'll see. Inside, the heat of the kitchen hit him like a memory. The clang of pots, the hiss of frying pans, the low gospel music crackling from a dusty radio. This wasn't catered charity. This was work. And it smelled like home, someone's home. Maybe a home he'd never had. Maya turned as he entered. She didn't blink, didn't soften, just pointed toward the sink. Aprons on the hook. Dishes start stacking up in 20 minutes. He nodded and went. There were no more words between them for the next hour. Just the rhythm of clattering plates, splashing water, and the occasional shout of, hot behind you, as volunteers moved trays and trays of food to be served at sunrise. Richard scrubbed, he rinsed, he dried. By the time his hands were red and raw, the first line of guests had filed through the serving hall, grateful and quiet. He looked up as Maya approached with a tray of dirty pans. Her face was glistening with sweat, her eyes alert. Not bad, she said, for a rookie. He managed a breathless smile. Do I get a gold star? No, she said, but you get to keep washing. Another tray landed next to him. Around noon, when the line had dwindled and most of the cleanup was done, Miss Earline brought over 2 chipped mugs of weak coffee and set them on a small table in the back corner of the kitchen. Sit, both of you, she ordered, before walking away without waiting for protest. Maya sat first, arms folded. Richard followed, wiping his hands on his jeans. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maya said, Why are you really here? He stirred the coffee slowly. Because when I was on the ground the other day, and you were helping me up, you were the first person in years who didn't want anything from me. That's not true, Maya said, tone level. He looked up, surprised. I wanted you to get up. Her words struck deeper than he expected. I deserved the way you looked at me, he admitted, and I deserved worse for not speaking up. She nodded. You did. Silence again. Honest, heavy, but not cruel. You ever think about what it means, she continued. To have power but choose not to use it. He leaned back. All the time. That's how we keep it. She studied him. And now? I want to use it differently. I don't know how yet. But I'm trying to learn. Maya sipped her coffee, then set it down. Try harder. He nodded, swallowing the shame still lingering behind his ribs. They sat there like that, two people on opposite ends of a life neither one had chosen but both finally facing. Miss Earline returned with a plate of banana bread. Eat, she said. Forgiveness don't come on an empty stomach. Maya smiled faintly. Thanks, Missy. Richard looked at the bread, then back at Maya. You ever think, he asked, what it would take to fix everything that's broken? She didn't flinch. I don't want it fixed, she said. I want it respected. That's what people like you miss. He exhaled. I'm listening. She looked him over. For the first time, she didn't see just a man in an expensive coat. She saw raw edges. A small fire lit in a man who had built empires from ice. Then show up again tomorrow, she said. And the next day. We don't need saviors. We need neighbors. Outside, the day brightened slightly. Snow melted in patches. The hum of the city grew louder. But in that kitchen, at that quiet table, something had begun. Not reconciliation, not yet, but presence. And sometimes, showing up is the bravest act of all. You're late. Henderson's voice sliced through the polished air of the private conference room like an impatient blade. He didn't look up from the stack of contracts spread neatly in front of him. Richard pulled off his coat, laid it across the back of the chair, and took a moment before sitting. His hands were still a little raw from the morning's work at the church. He hadn't worn gloves. Somehow, it felt wrong to be too comfortable. I had something to do, Richard replied evenly. Henderson finally glanced up, assessing him. You look tired. You all right? I'm fine. Well, we've got real work to do. The city's pushing for confirmation by Friday. They want to start demolition by end of next month, first phase on parcel R2 Amperes. Richard glanced down at the documents. Diagrams, projections, red circles over old buildings that looked like targets. No mention of who lived inside them. No space for names like Maya William, or Miss Earline, or Pastor Lewis. Phase 1 includes the block with the church and the diner, Henderson said, tapping a spot with his pen. Once we clear that, the rest falls like dominoes. Richard didn't move. Henderson leaned back in his seat. Come on, man. You were all in 2 weeks ago. What's changed? Richard looked at him. Do you know what's across from that diner? An eyesore? Henderson smirked. A whole lot of unrealized potential? A community kitchen. Volunteers feeding people before sunrise. Kids doing homework in the pews. Women handing out blankets from cardboard boxes. That's what's across the street. Henderson's smile flattened. I know you didn't bring me here for a sermon. No, I brought you here to talk about what kind of future we're building. And who gets left behind in the process. Henderson gave a short laugh. This isn't about morality. It's about capital. You can't preserve a city by pretending it's still the 1,960 seconds. These people, bless their hearts, they don't have the leverage to stop progress. Richard's fingers drummed lightly on the tabletop. They don't have the leverage because we designed it that way. There was a pause. Then Henderson sighed, suddenly tired of the conversation. I get it. You had a moment. You feel guilty about the girl. That happens. Sympathy is natural. But don't let it cloud your instincts. Richard said nothing. Henderson leaned forward. You've made a career out of seeing 10 moves ahead. You know what this area will be worth once we break ground. 5 years from now, Rose Hill won't be a block of boarded-up diners and thrift stores. It'll be high-end condos, co-working spaces, brunch spots. It'll be profitable. And that's the only language that matters. I'm not sure I speak that language anymore, Richard said. Henderson's voice turned sharp. Then you're in the wrong room. Richard rose, slow and deliberate. Maybe I am. He gathered the paperwork, stacked it neatly, and pushed it back across the table. I'm postponing the buyout. Henderson stood too, jaw tight. You can't be serious. I am. We're going to revisit the community impact. Talk to actual residents. Hear what they need, not what we assume they want. That's not how this works. It's how it's going to work now, Richard said. Do you understand what you're risking? This deal's worth millions. Your name is on every dotted line. You pull back now. You lose credibility. Richard looked him dead in the eye. Then maybe credibility isn't what I thought it was. Henderson sneered. You think that girl's going to pat you on the back for this? You think she'll forget what you let happen to her? No, Richard replied. I don't want her to forget. I want her to know I remember. He walked out, coat folded over one arm, leaving behind the kind of silence that only came when money lost the upper hand. That afternoon, Richard stood across the street from Rose Hill Diner. The neon sign still buzzed in the window, but the life inside it had dimmed. Fewer customers, staff who moved slower, a machine still running, but with no soul. He remembered what Maya had said. We don't need saviors, we need neighbors. His phone rang. Sterling, he answered. It was his assistant. You've got a call from City Development. They're asking for confirmation on the demolition schedule. Tell them we're reviewing community options. Sir, they won't like that. Then they can wait. He hung up. He crossed the street not into the diner, but past it, toward a small open lot behind the church. He stood there for several minutes, hands in his coat pockets, watching the wind blow paper scraps across the cracked pavement. From behind him came a voice he didn't expect. You look like you lost something. He turned. It was Pastor Lewis, a cup of coffee in his hand and a calm presence that seemed to ground the air around him. Maybe I did, Richard said. Or maybe I'm finally seeing what I couldn't before. Pastor Lewis nodded slowly. Truth has a way of making us uncomfortable before it makes us free. Richard looked down. I need your help. I want to understand what this place really means to people. I don't want to erase it, I want to find a way to build with it. The pastor considered him a long moment, then extended the coffee. Walk with me, he said, and bring your boots. Truth don't travel on paved roads. Richard smiled faintly as he took the cup. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing growth. He was chasing understanding. And maybe that was a better kind of wealth. The church smelled like lemon oil and old hymnals. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting colorful fragments across the worn hardwood floors, as Pastor Lewis led Richard down a narrow hallway toward a modest room tucked behind the sanctuary. This is where it starts, the pastor said, opening the door. Richard stepped inside. The space was nothing like the conference rooms he knew. No marble tables, no leather chairs, no bottled water arranged in neat pyramids, just folding chairs in a circle, a dusty whiteboard with someone's faded notes about voter registration drives, and a bulletin board pinned with photographs of neighborhood kids holding up science fair ribbons or choir certificates. This is where the community council meets? Richard asked. Lewis nodded. Twice a month. Sometimes more if the water main breaks again. Richard looked around. How do you make decisions with so little? The pastor smiled. We listen. We disagree. We pray. We figure it out. The people who come here, they live here. They care what happens. That's worth more than a boardroom full of consultants. Richard ran his hand along the back of one of the chairs. It wobbled slightly. Sit, Lewis said gently. There's someone I want you to meet. A few minutes later, the door creaked open and a woman stepped inside. Mid-60 seconds, hair in tight gray curls, eyes sharp behind thick glasses. She wore a heavy coat and held a manila folder against her chest like armor. This is Miss Loretta Bell, Lewis said. She's lived on Monroe Street for over 40 years. She also organizes our Tenants Alliance. Richard stood. Miss Bell, thank you for meeting with me. I didn't come to be polite, she said, sitting without invitation. I came because folks are scared. They hear your name. They pack boxes. Richard sat again. That's why I'm here. I need to understand what's at stake, what people are afraid of. Miss Bell opened the folder. Inside were copies of tax assessments, building code violations, letters from landlords. She slid one paper across the table. You see this? She said. This family's rent, Went up $75 last month. The landlord blamed upcoming redevelopment. Richard frowned. That wasn't authorized. The city hasn't. The city don't stop greed. It rewards it, she snapped. And developers like you give them the excuse. He took a breath. I'm not here to defend bad actors. Then stop writing checks to them, she said. You want to make something right? Start by helping people stay. Pastor Lewis watched silently from the corner, hands folded. Richard nodded. What would that look like? Rent stabilization, she said without hesitation. Community land trust. Affordable housing mandates written into your contract before a single brick gets laid. And no mass evictions. Richard took it in. That's doable. Costly, but doable. Justice is costly, Miss Bell said. That's what makes it justice, and not charity. He looked down at the paper in his hand. The numbers were real, the impact more so. Let's draft a plan, he said. Miss Bell narrowed her eyes. You don't get points for trying, Mr. Sterling. You only get respect when we see action. Richard met her gaze. Then give me the chance to earn it. Mel. By the time the meeting ended, the church was emptying of its midweek volunteers. Outside, the wind picked up and rustled the old oak trees that lined the sidewalk. Richard walked slowly alongside Pastor Lewis, both bundled against the cold. You're not the first developer to walk into this neighborhood, the pastor said, but you might be the first to walk in and not immediately look for what to tear down. I used to think real estate was all numbers, Richard replied. But numbers don't tell you what a front porch means to someone who watched their kids grow up there. Pastor Lewis gave him a sidelong look. Maya knows that porch well. Richard stopped. She still doesn't trust me. She shouldn't, Lewis said plainly. Not yet. Trust isn't given, it's built. Same as any foundation. I'd like to talk to her again. Lewis nodded toward the corner. She's at the thrift shop today, volunteering. Richard hesitated. Should I give her space? You already took enough of it, the pastor replied, not unkindly. Time you gave some back. 15 minutes later, Richard stood outside Harriet's Hands Thrift, a tiny storefront named after Maya's mother. A bell chimed as he entered. The space smelled of lavender sachets and old denim. Racks of second-hand coats lined the walls. A child's tricycle stood near the back, next to a basket labeled $1 toys. Maya was behind the counter, sorting books into two piles, keep and recycle. She looked up, and her expression didn't shift. You're persistent, she said. I'm learning to be, Richard replied. She closed the book she was holding. What do you want now? To say that I met with your counsel. I listened. I have a lot to unlearn. Maya raised an eyebrow. You get a cookie for that? No, but I want to keep showing up, like you said. She studied him for a long moment. There's a church dinner on Friday, she said. Spaghetti and gospel night. Fundraiser for the heating bills. I'll be there. She nodded. Don't come empty-handed. He smiled. I'll bring pie. Sweet potato, she said. None of that store-bought apple mess. He laughed, caught off guard. Yes, ma'am. For the first time, a corner of her mouth turned upward, just barely. As he turned to leave, she called out, Mr. Sterling. He turned. You still owe me a job. He nodded. I'll do better than that. Outside, the sky was finally starting to clear. For the first time in days, light shone without filter. Inside, Maya returned to her books, but something in her shoulders relaxed. And Richard, he walked back into the city with a notebook full of names, stories, and a new kind of responsibility. He wasn't saving anyone. He was just beginning to show up. Friday came with wind and rain, the kind that made Richmond's old bricks glisten and its alleys hum with puddle songs. The cold was damp, not sharp like snow, but the kind that got into your bones if you didn't keep moving. Inside the church hall, however, it was warm. Alive. Laughter bounced off the cinder-block walls. A local quartet warmed up near the pulpit. Folding chairs scraped the floor. Kids darted between tables draped in gingham cloths, their fingers sticky with icing from early desserts. Richard stood in the kitchen doorway, holding 2 sweet potato pies wrapped in foil. He wore the same flannel shirt from his last visit, washed, ironed, still smelling faintly of starch and wood smoke. Maya spotted him first, halfway through stirring a vat of spaghetti sauce. She didn't wave. She just raised one brow and nodded toward an empty counter. He got the message. Put 'em down there. Hope you didn't forget the nutmeg. I followed a church recipe I found online, he replied. She gave him a look. That better not be from Pinterest. Cross my heart. She smirked just a little and returned to her pot. Richard exhaled. No speeches, no grand gestures, just pie and presence. A hand clapped his shoulder from behind. Didn't think you'd show. He turned. A man in his 70s stood there tall, wiry, his brown eyes bright under a cap that read Tuskegee Airmen Alumni. Mr. Luther, Maya said from the stove. You know Richard Sterling? I've seen his face on a few signs, the older man replied. Didn't expect to see his boots on our floor. I'm learning, Richard said, offering a hand. Mr. Luther didn't take it right away. He studied Richard the way a craftsman might study raw wood, looking for cracks, knots, flaws hidden in the grain. Then he gripped it, firm, testing. You know what I remember about this neighborhood? Luther said, guiding him toward a table. Back in '63, when they tried to run a freeway through here, called it urban renewal. All it renewed was white wealth and black displacement. Richard Saturday, I've read the articles. That's your problem, Luther replied. You read history. We remember it. Across the hall, the band struck a chord and began warming up. Maya handed off the sauce to a younger volunteer and made her way over, wiping her hands on a towel. Luther didn't lower his voice. So what makes you different? Richard met his eyes. Nothing yet, but I want to earn the chance to be. Luther hummed. That's a good start. But we don't need heroes, son. We've had plenty of men come with promises and pens. You want to do right? Listen. Learn. And leave room for those who came before you. Maya leaned against the table, arms crossed. Told you, didn't I? You did, Richard admitted. Luther looked at Maya with something close to pride. This girl's mama cooked in this church for 30 years. Harriet could stretch a sack of beans like it was gold. And she'd still feed the boy who stole from her garden the day before. She believed in full bellies before full judgments, Maya added quietly. Like I said, Luther grinned. Smart girl. The music started for real then, soft gospel harmonies laced with blues undertones. Someone passed plates down the table. Bowls of salad, bread rolls, and pasta steaming like little prayers. Maya stood to serve. Richard started to rise too, but Luther stopped him. Sit, son, let her lead. He obeyed. As the night wore on, Richard didn't speak much. He ate. He listened. He watched a neighborhood unfold in layers: grief and joy, poverty and pride, sorrow braided with song. He watched a man in a wheelchair lead the clap on a hymn, watched a teenage girl recite a poem about losing her brother to the system, watched Maya laugh with a boy who reminded him painfully of the kid he used to be before ambition outgrew wonder. Later, as people cleared dishes and folded chairs, Maya found him again, stacking napkins. You did good, she said. Did I pass the test? She smiled softly. It wasn't a test. It was an invitation. To what? To stop standing at the edge of people's stories, she said, and start walking through them. Richard looked down at his hands. I met with Miss Bell again. We're going to restructure the development plan. Affordable housing, community spaces, no displacements. You really gonna see it through? Maya asked. I have to, he said. I can't unsee what I've seen, can't unfeel it. She studied him. Then let's hope it's enough. He nodded. Outside, rain had turned to mist. The streets shimmered under streetlights, and the air smelled like soil and salvation. As Richard stepped outside, Luther joined him, holding a cane that he didn't seem to need. Come back next week, the old man said. Richard blinked. You think I've earned that already? Nope, Luther grinned. But you stayed long enough to deserve a second shot. Richard chuckled. I'll be here. He turned back for one last glance through the window. Maya was helping a girl fold tablecloths, her voice calm and easy. And for the first time, Richard didn't see a woman he had failed. He saw someone whose strength he was lucky enough to witness. He walked down the sidewalk alone, but lighter. This wasn't a redemption arc. It was the beginning of a different kind of presence, quiet, earned, and rooted. Richard Sterling sat in his hotel suite, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and the eerie quiet that often accompanied wealth. The city glittered beyond the glass like a galaxy frozen in time, but his eyes weren't on the skyline. They were fixed on the document in his hand. It was a formal notice from Henderson and Coles LLP. Re. Breach of preliminary development agreement, immediate legal action pending. The paper was heavy, thick-stocked, embossed, designed to feel permanent, unshakable. He set it down on the coffee table and exhaled. They weren't bluffing. His decision to stall the buyout, to listen instead of bulldoze, had triggered a chain reaction. Henderson had called in favors, lawyers, city contacts. Pressure was mounting, fast. There was a time when Richard would have pulled the trigger, flattened the opposition, and walked away with a fat return and a clean reputation. But that time had passed. He stood, running a hand through his hair, and moved toward the minibar but stopped himself. Water would do. His phone buzzed. Maya William. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said, voice low. "You okay?" she asked. "You sound tired." "I'm fine," he lied. "Just dealing with some fallout." She paused. "I heard from Pastor Lewis. Word's out. Developers are circling. They're trying to force my hand," he admitted. "Legally, contractually, politically." "And what are you going to do?" Richard glanced at the letter again. "Fight. If I cave now, the whole thing goes back to square one. People get displaced. The church goes. So does everything else." There was silence on the line. Then Maya said, "You sure about this? They'll come for your name next." "I know," he said. "I just can't know the truth anymore. You sound like someone who's just realized justice has a price." He smiled faintly. "And it's non-refundable." They talked a while longer, nothing poetic, just small details about the thrift shop's new shelves and a little girl who donated a bag of stuffed animals to kids who need more hugs. Before they hung up, Maya said, "If you need a place to land, we're still here." "The church, I mean." "Thanks," Richard said. "I might take you up on that." But he didn't sleep that night. He read the contract again and again. Every clause felt like a trap he had willingly built, every signature a mirror to the man he used to be. The next morning, Richard arrived at City Hall, not in a driver-driven car or under the hush of anonymity. He walked, alone. No assistant, no PR team. He stepped into a room of suits and stiff smiles. At the long table sat Henderson, looking smug as ever, flanked by 2 city attorneys and a representative from Xander Holdings, the original equity backers of the Rose Hill development. "Well," Henderson said, folding his hands, "if it isn't the neighborhood's new messiah." Richard remained standing. "I'm here to formally propose a revision to our development agreement." A low murmur passed around the table. "The existing plan is null," he continued. "It violates the human interest clause outlined in subsection 3B, page 42, due to its failure to consult resident councils." "You signed that clause," one attorney said sharply. "And I'm invoking it," Richard replied. "Clause 3B was inserted by me years ago to prevent the kind of predatory gentrification this project has become." Henderson's smile faded. "You're bluffing." "I'm not," Richard said calmly. "And if you push this, I'll make every part of our internal conversations public. Emails, messages, the ones where we joked about cleaning up Rose Hill. I have everything backed up." A pause, then chaos. Voices rose, chairs scraped, threats were made. But Richard stood still. "Either we rewrite this deal to include a community land trust and housing protections," he said, "or I walk and take your reputations with me." One of the attorneys, an older woman with a silver streak in her hair, narrowed her eyes. "If you push this through, Mr. Sterling," she said coldly, "you'll never develop in this state again." "I'm not trying to develop," he said. "I'm trying to repair." Later that afternoon, as news of the confrontation spread, Pastor Lewis stood at the front of the church's multipurpose room, relaying the update to Maya and a dozen residents. "He did what?" one woman asked, her hand over her heart. "He threatened them with exposure?" another added, stunned. Maya sat in the back, arms crossed, listening without expression. When the pastor finished, the room buzzed with nervous hope. Maya remained silent. Miss Earline turned to her. "Well? You don't look surprised." "I'm not," Maya said. "I'm just wondering what it'll cost him next." That evening, Richard returned to the diner for the first time in weeks. The bell over the door jingled. Carter looked up from the register and froze. "Well, look who it is," he muttered. "I'm not here for you," Richard said. He walked past the counter, toward the same back booth he had once sat in, and took out a pen. From his coat pocket, he pulled a copy of the new proposal, notarized, ready to be filed Monday morning. He slid it into a manila envelope and sealed it. Then he stood and handed it to a waitress. "Can you make sure this gets to Miss William?" The girl nodded, wide-eyed. He turned to leave but paused at the door, and for the first time, he looked Carter directly in the eye. "You fired the best thing that ever happened to this place." Carter didn't answer. "I hope your conscience is louder than your pride," Richard added and left. Outside, the wind howled, but Richard felt strangely still. He'd put his reputation on the line, his wealth, his power, not for a woman, not for a deal, but for the silence he could no longer tolerate and the voices that deserved to be heard. The envelope sat unopened on Maya's kitchen table for over an hour.